Yo, what's up? It's Patrick from GuideQ, and we've been having a lot of conversations about incrementally loading warehouses and lakehouses in Fabric. And Alex Powers and I were chatting about it, and Alex actually wrote a really good blog post on his blog called "It's Not About a Sale." He's got this pattern that he uses with data flows and pipelines. It got me to thinking, right? What if I have a usable date? Everybody wants to know how to do incremental load, so incremental refresh, like with Power BI. When you're using Fabric, you're going to be in direct lake mode. And so it's not about incrementally loading the semantic model. It's more about incrementally loading the warehouse or the lake house. And so in this video, I'm going to show you how to, use pipelines and data flows to incrementally load your warehouse if you don't have a date. All right. So what I would like to do. Enough of all this talking. Let's do what? Let's head over to my laptop. Over here in Management Studio, the first thing you want to do is you want to create this table. I call it my meta table for my data warehouse. And this table has two columns. It has a table name and the max ID. You may not be using IDs. Maybe you're using something else that you want to incrementally load by. Completely up to you. Maybe you don't want to make that column an integer. You want to make it a string to make it more flexible. Up to you. In my case, it's all integers that I'm using. So I made that column a big int because I don't know how big that integer is going to get. And so now if we run a quick query of that table that I created, you'll see that it's the name of the table that I want to incrementally load. Orders, order details. I want to pull data incrementally from that. And this is the current max ID in that table. The table has an auto incrementing column. In the case of SQL Server, it's called an identity column. And every time I run my warehouse load, I want to grab that ID and say, give me everything that's greater than that ID and load that in my staging tables. And then I'll run a process to load it into my facts and or DIMs. So I have this table created and it's just storing this, and I'll have to manage this table part of the pipeline. And then another thing I've done is I've created a store procedure that accepts the table name as a parameter, and it'll return the max ID for a given table. So if I take this store procedure, copy this, let's do this in real time and say orders. And I'll run this. If I called it orders in the table, it returns that ID. And so any table that I insert into that table and run this query with, it'll return the ID for that particular one. So that's the only setup you need to do as far as from the database side, and you create that store procedure. Then what I did, I headed over to Fabric, and this is where I've adopted Alex's pattern somewhat. And so I've connected to my source system, to my orders table. You can see right here. And if I go to the advanced editor, what you'll see is that I've connected to the orders table in my Northwind database. It's just, I created a view called DW orders. And then I have a filter that says, give me everything that's greater than the order ID for my max order ID. Where do you get that from, Patrick? Well, I created a function in Power Query for each table that I want to incrementally load. And so you can see that function returns 11771, which just happens to be the max ID in that table. And if I go back, so let's do a quick refresh. There's been some new data added to my orders table. And you can see it's all the orders that's greater than that particular number that's returned. And that's because of the filter that I've added here in this last step. So it's saying select, from DW orders where order ID is greater than my max order ID, which is the number that the function is returning. And so it's just executing this store procedure to return that value. And then I use that return value in Power Query. And then what I do after that, let's close the data flow. And then what I have next is I have a pipeline that I've created. And basically it calls that data flow. So you can see it's calling stage orders. And then after it calls the data flow to stage the data up into my staging tables that I created in my data warehouse, it executes this store procedure that I created that actually updates the max IDs for any given table. And you probably can iterate through these. You can create some looping so you don't have to have multiple tasks there, activities in the pipeline. But I just did this just for quick. So I'm calling this store procedure and it just updates that table with the max ID from my table and accepts two parameters, table name and column name. Let me show you what this store procedure looks like. So I'm going to head over here. So this particular store procedure is somewhat dynamic. And so I created this store procedure in my source system, and it accepts the table name and a column name. And this is my output list. And then I'm defining a dynamic SQL statement. So you give me that column name, you give me that table name, I generate a SQL statement, and then I use SP execute SQL to execute that query and output the max ID. And then I run an update statement on my meta table to keep those in sync. And so if we go back over to my pipeline, you can see that's what's happening here. So I stage the data up using the data flow, and then I say, okay, update those max IDs, because any subsequent run of this pipeline pipeline will only pull in items that's greater than the max ID that I put in that table. And then finally, I wrap this up by creating a full pipeline that will actually clear out the staging tables, execute that other pipeline, and then it does a subsequent data warehouse load. It loads my facts and my DIMs. And maybe I'll come back in another video and show you how I, simulate identity columns in the warehouse, because they're not currently supported in the warehouse in Fabric. It's on the roadmap, but I load my DIMs and my facts up using additional store procedures. So let's go ahead and run this pipeline. You can see I've already run it before. Let's go ahead and run this pipeline. So now the execution is complete. I ran each one of these activities. I ran the entire pipeline. And so now if I go over here, 11771, if I run this query, you'll see now it's 11784. That's because the pipeline executed the store procedure for each one of these tables and updated it. And then if I go over to Fabric and I open that data flow back up, so let's go back here and open my data flow up, you'll see that the two functions that I created that's calling those stored procedures actually return the same numbers. And then if I go to either one of these tables, you'll see that they don't return any rows because I don't have any data. If more data was added, it would show data greater than that ID that's stored in that meta table. And just like that, I'm doing an incremental refresh into my warehouse. Some people call this like a watermark. I'm using that pattern to incrementally load your data warehouse. All right, if you have any questions, you have any comments, you know what to do. Post it in the comments below. If you want to know more about Fabric, there's probably a playlist flying over my head. I guess check it out. And as always, from Adam and myself, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.